Good morning. Good morning. It is a privilege and a pleasure and every other adjective you can think of to describe how I feel about being here with you this morning. I am from the big city of Denmark, South Carolina, where we have 3 stoplights and a blinking light. And my mom and dad, they always tell me that the 2 most important words in the English language are the words, thank you, and that they're not nearly said enough. And so before I begin, I want to simply start by saying thank you to your president, who I've known and had an opportunity to meet with in the back. Thank you to the vice president of student affairs and everyone in student activities and student affairs. But even more importantly, I want to say thank you to someone who has become a friend of mine over the past couple of months. The Student Government Association president from right here at Alabama State University, Mr. Nicholas Ivey. And I know sometimes it's a thankless job, and I remember my days being SJA president, but the best is yet to come, and I look forward to meeting you at the top. I travel around the world having an opportunity to speak to groups like this, but I find it to be the most joy and most excitement during Black History Month. Personally, I begin to celebrate Black History Month on January 1, and I stop around December 31st. But for most of the world, this is an opportunity to show what I like to say is hashtag Black Excellence. And for the purpose of today's discussion, I want us to take a journey. And for every single journey, there has to be a destination. And for the purpose of this discussion, we're going to take a journey to excellence. And I have to apologize to everyone who brought me here and to Nicholas and all the administrators for bombarding you with questions that are rooted in such simplicity, but they're necessary to answer as we navigate this journey to excellence. The first is, how far have we come? And the next is, where do we go from here? In anything that you do, you have to take that moment of introspection. Amazingly, you have to take that moment of introspection on this journey to excellence and ask yourself those very simple questions. How far have we come? And where do we go from here? I like to use some historical context when I'm having this discussion. I like to think about 1946. A young man who was so fair-skinned that he could pass as white. His name was George Elmore. And George Elmore decided he was going to go down and register to vote. And so he did. And then George wanted to vote in the first gubernatorial election, Democratic primary election in the South. And when he showed up, everyone knew who George was because George owned 2 liquor stores. He owned a 5 and dime store. He owned a photography company and drove cabs. And when he showed up to vote, they said, "We know who you are, George. You're a Negro. You can't vote here." And George said, "That's enough. I'll tell you." George decided to file a lawsuit. And when he filed the lawsuit, they stopped distributing to his 5 and dime and his liquor store, and they firebombed his house, and they destroyed all of his taxi cabs. And George's wife ended up becoming institutionalized from the trauma that she went through with the crosses that were burning on her yard. She actually died in a mental health facility. George himself, he died a very, very broken man, but his lawsuit, Elmore versus Rice, is the reason that African Americans can vote in primaries in the South. How far have we come? I think about 1955. And I think about a young domestic worker who was 22 years old named Sarah Mae Fleming. And I think about the fact that in 1955, Sarah Mae Fleming decided that when she got off work, this story does sound familiar, she decided that she was going to go sit down in the first seat that she found on a bus. But that wasn't her sin. Her sin was the fact that she didn't exit through the rear door, the door that the Negroes used, but she exited through the front door. And as she was walking off the bus driver punched her in the stomach and rode her down the steps. You see, Sarah Mae Fleming, she wasn't looking for history that day. In fact, I actually compare her to Isaiah, who in the Bible it stated was in the full awe of the Lord, and they asked, "Who shall I send?" And Isaiah said, "Here am I, send me." You see, Sarah Mae Fleming wasn't looking for history, but instead she stood up and said, "Here am I, send me." And Sarah Mae Fleming, she stared down the Southern segregationist movement. She stared down the largest co-op and electric company in the South, and she filed a lawsuit which was known as Fleming versus SCE&G, and she laid the foundation in law and action some 17 months before a young lady named Rosa Parks decided to take a seat. I think about 1949, and parents of African-American children not far from where I was born in Clarendon County, South Carolina, how they were tired of having their black kids have to walk to school while white kids rode school buses, sometimes as far as 9 miles. And so they said they were going to file a lawsuit, and in Little Clarendon County, South Carolina, this group of families, they joined hands and hearts, and they filed this case which was known as Briggs V Elliott. It was the first case filed in the landmark case of Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. And in Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, Chief Justice Warren got a very rare unanimous opinion in which he held that segregation causes a sense of inferiority by placing children in environments not conducive to learning. He said segregation causes a sense of inferiority by placing children in environments not conducive to learning. So again, ask yourself that very simple question: how far have we come? Think about the fact that every single day, legislatures like the one right here in Alabama try to roll back our rights and access to the ballot box. And think about all of those things that George Elmore fought for and died for. And ask yourself that very simple question: how far have we come? You think about the fact that we have a lack of access to public transportation and a lack of access to utilities, and there are 100 cities in the United States of America that have a higher lead total in their water than Flint, Michigan. And you think about the fact that Sarah Mae Fleming stood up at the age of 22 when others would not. And ask yourself that very simple question: how far have we come? Or think about what Chief Justice Warren said in 1955 with Brown versus the Board of Education, and look around and you understand that kids go to school where their heating and air don't work, where their infrastructure is falling apart, where teachers push around carts because there's not enough space in the classroom. And again, ask yourself that very simple question: how far have we come? And as we're taking this journey to excellence, I have come to the resolve that in my 33 years of great wisdom, that the answer to the question, how far have we come, is that we've made progress, but we still have yet a ways to go. So then I pivot and I go to the next question, which is, where do we go from here? I want to share with you all the story about a young man who was born at 633 Frederick Street in the big city of Denmark, South Carolina. And when he graduated from Voorhees High School, he actually went to Howard University. And when he got to Howard University, he befriended a man named Stokely Carmichael. The irony in this story is that Stokely convinced this young man from Denmark to drop out of school, and so he did. He dropped out of school and became a part of SNCC, or the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And he went up to Miami University of Ohio during Freedom Summer, where they were training SNCC activists before they came down to Alabama and went to Mississippi to register voters. And then he got a phone call. He got a phone call that he had to go to Philadelphia, Mississippi. How many of y'all have ever been to Philadelphia, Mississippi? It's about the size of this auditorium. And he went down to Philadelphia, Mississippi, and during the day they would hide in barns and sheds, and at night they would look in ditches and trenches. And ironically enough, they found the bodies of 3 of their friends. They found the bodies of 3 of their fellow slain civil rights workers, Goodman, Schroeder, and Cheney. They were murdered. They were behind the home of one of the local sheriff deputies and ministers in the town. And that was this young man from Denmark's first indoctrination into the civil rights movement. He ended up becoming national field director for SNCC. And then he became involved in the most deadly civil rights demonstration this country has ever seen. Let me say it louder for those in the back. He became involved in the most deadly civil rights demonstration this country has ever seen. You see, 50 years ago today, February 6th, 1968, the irony is that many of your teachers don't even know the story. The students at South Carolina State decided they were going to go down and protest the All-Star Bowling Alley, which is about a mile away from the campus. The history books call it Jim Crow's final hiding place, the last vestige of discrimination in Little Orangeburg, South Carolina. And they went down and they began to clap and chant, and they had this big protest, and they were tucked back in this right angle where the bowling alley was. And as they began to clap and chant and sing protest hymns, state troopers began to surround, and city police began to surround many of the students. And as they surrounded the students, they began to press up against the students, and the students began to press up against the glass, and the glass broke. And when the glass broke, the proverbial all hell broke loose. Many of the students from South Carolina State were beaten that night. And they were beaten not with normal police batons, but they were beaten with batons that were about this long, and at the end they had these leather rawhide whips. There's a young man named James Stroman who tells a story about seeing two state troopers hold one young lady while another one beat her. And you see the students, they had to go back to their campus and they had to heal not only their physical wounds, but their emotional wounds and mental wounds as well. And then came February 7th, 1968, 50 years ago tomorrow. And the history books say the tension was so thick you can cut it with a knife. But I like to compare it to, after y'all play A&M and y'all in the parking lot after the game and you feel like something's about to pop off. It's that type of tension. But nothing happened. And then came February 8th, 1968. And the students at South Carolina State decided they were going to go down and protest at the All-Star Bowling Alley again, but this time when the state troopers came and the city police came, they got the right idea. And they went back to their campus. And they built this huge bonfire on their campus. And you can imagine what it feels like in February in the South. At night, it's not too cold, but it's cool, and the fire just warms your bones ever so slightly, and the embers illuminate the darkness. And as they began to clap and chant and sing protest hymns, they could not foresee that South Carolina State troopers would line up along the embankment in front of their beloved campus. They did not foresee that South Carolina State troopers would close ranks like they did, and they did not foresee that they would have shotguns that were loaded with deadly double-aught buckshots of the same bullets we use to hunt deer, and they did not foresee that those shotguns would be turned on them with deadly intent. And for 8 seconds, 1001, 1002, 1003, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, shots were fired into the group of students. It killed 3, Henry Smith, Samuel Hammond, and Delano Middleton, and wounded another 28. This young man from Denmark was actually shot in the shoulder that night. And when he got to the infirmary on campus, they told him there was nothing they could do for him there. He had to go to the hospital. And when he got to the hospital, ironically enough, he was pointed out by the only black sheriff's deputy in Orangeburg County. And he was arrested. He was arrested and charged with 5 felonies, looking at a maximum of 75 years in prison. And young people, we know history better than people give us credit for. In between the night of February 8th, 1968 and 1972, when this young man from Denmark, South Carolina was tried, all 9 officers who fired shots into the group of students were tried, and all 9 officers were found not guilty. This young man from Denmark went to trial, and the lead investigators testified that he could not find the evidence. It had been destroyed in the years that had passed, but he did remember this young man from Denmark not on the night of the 8th, but on the night of the 6th, standing on top of a fire truck, lighting a bick and saying, "Burn, baby, burn." His indictment was backdated from February 8th to February 6th, and he was charged, tried, and convicted of rioting, becoming the first and only one-man riot in the history of this country. He ended up serving prison time, and when you look at him today and you see that his eyes don't pop like they used to from shedding so many tears, or his shoulders don't stand as upright from carrying the burdens of so many generations, and you ask him, what's the greatest sacrifice he had to make? He'll tell you the greatest sacrifice he had to make was not being in jail or losing his freedom per se. It was not being housed on death row when his bond was denied. But it was actually being in jail for the birth of his oldest daughter, or my big sister. Because this young man from Denmark who grew up into a civil rights hero is my father, Dr. Cleveland Sellers. And you see the lessons that I learned from people like my dad and Henry Smith and Samuel Hammond and Delano Middleton and Jimmy Lee Jackson and Majeska Simpkins and Septima Clark and Medgar Evers and Emmett Till and Martin, Malcolm, and Rose, is that the answer to the question, where do we go from here, lies fundamentally in the ability for us to do two things. The first is learn how to dream with our eyes open. And the second is damn hard. We have to rededicate ourselves to the proposition of loving our neighbors even when they don't love us. So as we're taking this journey to excellence and we ask ourselves this very first question, which is, how far have we come? And we use historical context. We understand, we look around, we're not stupid or blind, that we've made progress in this country, but contrary to popular belief in Barack Obama's election, we ain't made it to the promised land yet. And then as we pivot and answer the next question, which is, where do we go from here? We understand that that has two answers that we must answer. Dr. King gave us two choices. He said we can either have chaos or community, but in order to build community, we have to begin to love our neighbors even when they don't love us, and we have to learn how to dream with our eyes open. So I know you didn't bring me all the way down here for me to just leave you with some rhetoric, so let me give you a crystal clear example of what it means to dream with your eyes open. When I was 20 years old, I had just graduated from Morehouse College. I was preparing this speech to tell my parents about what my future entailed. I had a lot of swag, so I decided I was going to saunter down these steps and I was going to tell my parents what I was going to do with my life. And I went to the cook island. I was standing in between our little bar and the cook island, and my mom was cooking spaghetti, and my dad was going through the newspaper standing up as he always does. I said, Mom, Dad, I want you to know that on my 21st birthday in September, I'm going to announce that I'm running for the South Carolina House of Representatives. And my mom said she would vote for me, and my dad said he'd think about it. And so then I went out and I knocked on 2,600 doors, and for the record, I think you guys understand this, but I need to put an asterisk and clarify what that means, because when I was speaking to Cory Booker, he had a hard time comprehending that that was a lot of doors, because in New Jersey, people live in these buildings that are on top of each other. But where I'm from, you knock on a door and then you drive a mile and you knock on another door. June 13, 2006, I beat someone who was 82 years old, had been in office 26 years or longer than I had been born, and happened to be the youngest black elected official in the United States of America. But something was happening in our country. There was an amazing campaign and race for president of the United States. And so every day I would get home, there would be messages from Dennis Kucinich and Joe Biden and Chris Dodd and Bill Richardson and Bill and Hillary Clinton and Barack and Michelle Obama. And so I narrowed my choices down to two people I was going to support. Everybody wanted me to endorse them to be president of the United States, and I said, I'm going to narrow it down to Barack Obama and John Edwards. Let's just say I'm happy I made the right decision. And so finally, I'm the only legislator with a book bag on, because I'm running back and forth from the state capitol to law school. And I pull up to law school, and there is a private number on my phone, and let me just give this PSA. It's not a part of my speech, but if somebody calls you from a private number, you need to know it's one of two people calling you. It's either somebody very important or it's a student loan company calling you to get their money back. So anyway, I pick up the phone and they say, do you have enough time to speak to Senator Obama? And I had spoken to the senator many times before, and I say, of course. I have a slight brain freeze at the time, and I pick up the phone and he starts talking to me, and I say, well, I'm on my way to constitutional law class, and that's when I realized that my brain had frozen because Barack Obama actually used to teach constitutional law. And so he began to ask me all these questions about where we were in class and case law, and I had to regretfully inform him that I hadn't read all semester. And so we proceeded to go through the conversation, and he said, now is the time. I want you to endorse me to be president of the United States. And I say, I will. I'll do so under two conditions. One is that you come to my district, and two is that my mom gets an opportunity to get out the house and work on the campaign. He said, done and done. And so I travel the country. I go to Florida, Virginia. I go everywhere, Ohio, campaigning on behalf of Barack Obama. And then they say, Barack Obama wants to come to your district. I have a small problem in that I'm from Denmark, South Carolina, and my district is very poor and very rural, and unless I'm putting Barack Obama in a cotton field, I have no place to put him. But we settled on South Carolina State University, and we put him in a gymnasium that's about this size, that's named after Henry Smith, Samuel Hammond, and Delano Middleton, are the three young men that were killed in the Orangeburg Massacre. And I'll never forget, I pulled up that day, I had State House security. I mean, I was feeling myself. It was unbelievable. There were people from all around, Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia, Virginia, because this was the height of Obama mania. This is January 2008. People just wanted to touch Barack Obama. This gymnasium was like, if you can imagine Alabama State, Alabama A&M basketball, plus they let fans on the court to stand up, and we got a little stage in center court, and there's only a metal guardrail from the men's locker room to the stage. That's it. And it's people everywhere else. And so I pull up and I go into the green room, which was the men's basketball locker room. And sitting down was Kerry Washington and Chris Tucker. And so it's me, Kerry Washington, and Chris Tucker, and we're waiting on Barack Obama. And so finally, one of my good friends, Rick Wade, comes in and says, I'm going to run to the Orangeburg County Airport. The Orangeburg County Airport is literally half the size of the Montgomery Regional Airport. Nobody flies into there. And he says, I'll be right back. And he comes back with Usher. And so now it's me, Usher, Chris Tucker, and Kerry. This is a true story. I got pictures. It's me, Kerry Washington, Chris Tucker, and Usher waiting on Barack Obama. And everything in politics is late. And so after about an hour, they're playing Ain't No Mountain High Enough. The gymnasium is going crazy, and they say it's go time. And the senator swags in. He said, Bakari, you ready? I say, of course. And just imagine walking out and nobody's watching 5-on-5 basketball. They're only watching you. And it's my district, so people know me, and I don't get a great introduction like I got today, but when you speak a lot, many times you get what's called a VOG, or a voice of God, and they say, and now welcome to the stage, Representative Bakari Sellers. And I go out and people are pulling on you and the crowd is going crazy, and you begin to like autograph babies, and it's like pandemonium going on. And I walk to the stage and I talk about Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, but we oftentimes get caught up in the rhythmic cadence of I have a dream that one day we shall, but we forget about the most important part of that speech, in which he talks about the fierce urgency of now. And so I talk about the fierce urgency of now and how we could literally change the course of history and change the course of our great country by casting one ballot at that moment, at that time, for this one man. And then I turn around and I introduce Chris Tucker, and the decibel level gets a little bit louder. And then Chris comes out and speaks for a little while, and then he turns around and introduces Kerry Washington, and it gets a little bit louder. And then Kerry introduces Usher, and then all the women start passing out. And then Usher introduces Barack Obama. And if you can imagine something being so loud that all you hear is a buzzing in your ear. The gymnasium was literally rocking. We were supposed to stand on stage and while he spoke, but we just stood on stage and took a picture. And to my left in this picture is Chris Tucker. To my right is the 44th President of the United States. To his right is Kerry Washington, and to her right is Usher Raymond. And people all the time, they ask me when they see that picture, they say, what were you thinking at that moment? And I remind them, I say that it was about 300 yards away from where my father was shot, and where the blood of my family literally ran through the soil of my great state, where my father was a part of something larger than himself, where he nearly paid the ultimate sacrifice and 3 young men, 2 college students and 1 high school student, actually did. I was only 19 miles away from where I was in my kitchen, and I decided to dream with my eyes open, where I decided to have dreams of grandeur, of changing the world, and then having my opportunity to become a part of something larger than myself, and then ordering my steps to see it done. I said I was only 19 miles away from my home and only 300 yards away from where my father was shot, but I had gone so far. You see, that is the concept of dreaming with your eyes open. It's understanding that you do not have to be confined to your surroundings. You do not have to be confined to any gates. You do not have to be confined to any expectations, and you do not have to be confined to any zip code. You can dream big dreams, and you can dare to be excellent. You see, on this journey to excellence, we have to remember these 2 questions. How far have we come, and where do we go from here? And then as we get there, we have to understand what the definition of excellence is. When you get back to class today, I want you to go to your teachers and I want you to tell them that the speaker today told us that you might be a good teacher, but the greatest educator of all time is Benjamin Elijah Mays. Your teacher's probably going to step back and say, yeah, he was right. Benjamin Elijah Mays once said, in all things that you do them so well that no man living, dead, or yet to be born can do them better. See, that's the definition of excellence. That is why we celebrate this month every single day of the year. That is what it means to be successful on this journey. And then, when we get to the finish line, maybe somebody somewhere will simply look at you and say, job well done. Thank you, and God bless you all.